Use the crowbar. Under your right shoulder. Okay.
What you're hearing is the panicked voice of a deep-sea salvage diver talking to his supervisor on the surface. The diver is 100 feet down, moving cautiously through the wreckage of a capsized tugboat lying upside down on the seabed off the coast of Nigeria.
Yeah, the one side's a straight wall, Roger.
You can tell which voice is his. It's high-pitched and distorted due to the helium-oxygen mix he's breathing to survive at this depth.
Okay. Yeah.
A camera mounted on his helmet transmits everything he sees to his colleagues watching from the dive ship above. The tugboat he's moving through sank 3 days ago with all of its crew. Everyone on board was presumed dead. His team's mission is to recover the bodies. He swims through the wreck, his flashlight cutting through the swirling silt and near zero visibility, and then his beam illuminates a pale hand.
Ceiling, yeah? Okay. What's that? Okay. All right, you found one, yeah?
The hand grabs his.
He's alive, he's alive. Okay, keep him there.
That hand, which terrified the diver back in 2013, belonged to the ship's cook. His name is Harrison Okene. What happened to Harrison in those 3 grueling days trapped in a sunken boat is a tale of horror and astonishing survival.
What's your name? Harrison. Okay, Harrison. My name is Colby.
Against all odds, against all science, against all logic, he survived 60 hours underwater in conditions that should have killed him within minutes. This is the incredible true story of the man who shouldn't exist. The story of Harrison Okene. Usually, waking up because you have to go to the bathroom is annoying, but on May 26, 2013, waking up and leaving his bunk to use the bathroom was a decision that saved 29-year-old Harrison Okene's life. Harrison was the ship's cook aboard the Jascon 4, a tugboat operating in the Gulf of Guinea off the coast of Nigeria. He was a quiet, religious man who had been working at sea for years to support his wife and young family back home. Like most of the crew, Harrison was asleep in his quarters as the tugboat moved through the dark waters of the southeast Atlantic. The Gulf of Guinea is rich with petroleum-laden layers of sedimentary seabed. Offshore oil rig drilling operations dot the African coast here, a testament to the region's vast underwater wealth. The Jascon 4 was one of many vessels servicing these operations, moving equipment and supplies between the rigs and the mainland. At around 4:30 a.m., Harrison stirred in his bunk. Nature was calling. Half asleep, he made his way through the narrow corridors of the tugboat toward the crew bathroom. It was a routine he'd done hundreds of times before, a mundane moment that would soon become the difference between life and death. As Harrison settled into the small bathroom compartment, the rest of the crew remained fast asleep in their bunks, locked in their cabins, a security protocol against the pirates who frequently targeted ships in these waters. Harrison had no idea that this simple bathroom break, this ordinary human need, was about to become the most important decision of his life. Just before 5 a.m., everything changed in an instant. The Jascon 4 was navigating through what seemed like calm waters when suddenly a massive rogue wave appeared out of nowhere.
When I was in the toilet, then I saw a wave on the vessel. So I feel normal. The boat only stumble is the ocean. That's how we normally row all the time. And suddenly, I heard a voice saying, which is the bosun saying, the vessel is about to capsize, the vessel is about to capsize.
These unpredictable giants can tower 60 feet or more above the surrounding ocean, striking without warning even in relatively peaceful seas. The wave hit the tugboat with devastating force. Harrison was still in the bathroom when he felt the ship lurch violently to one side. But this wasn't the normal rolling motion he was used to. The boat kept tilting further and further until Harrison realized with growing horror that it wasn't going to right itself.
He didn't say anything because he's fond of that. And the next thing I saw was the vessel that went upside down.
The Gascon 4 was capsizing. In those terrifying seconds, Harrison could hear the sounds of chaos throughout the ship. Metal groaning under immense stress, equipment crashing, and the desperate shouts of his crewmates who had been jolted awake by the disaster unfolding around them. The tugboat flipped completely upside down with shocking speed. What had been the ceiling was now the floor. What had been up was now down. Harrison found himself trapped in a world turned inside out, fighting against the rushing water that was flooding into the vessel. Within minutes, the Gascon 4 began its final descent toward the ocean floor, taking Harrison and his 11 crewmates with it. The boat plunged through 100 feet of dark water before coming to rest upside down on the seabed of the Gulf of Guinea. For Harrison, what had started as a simple bathroom break had become a fight for survival in the most unimaginable circumstances. When the rogue wave hit the Gascon 4, the capsizing was incredibly violent. Harrison described being dazed and thrown from one end of the small cubicle to another while still in the bathroom. This wasn't a gradual tipping. It was a sudden, forceful event that turned his world upside down in seconds. As water rushed in and the boat began to flip, Harrison managed to force open the heavy metal door of the toilet. This was a critical moment that would determine whether he lived or died. Stepping out into the corridor, everything was pitch black. Harrison was desperately trying to find an exit, searching for any watertight hatch that might lead to safety. Then, in the darkness, he saw something that would haunt him forever. 3 of his crewmates were in front of him, also trying to escape. Suddenly, they were washed away by the full force of the rushing water. In an instant, his colleagues disappeared into the flooded darkness, swept away by the violent surge. But instead of being washed out of the ship to his death, Harrison was swept along a narrow passageway by the same surging water. The current carried him into another toilet, this one adjoining a ship's officer's cabin. And here, in this second bathroom, he found his lifeline, an air pocket. When the Gascon 4 finally settled on the ocean floor, Harrison found himself in a nightmare beyond imagination. The physics of why this air pocket existed is actually quite simple. When the boat flipped and sank, air that had been trapped in the officer's cabin got compressed by the water pressure. The bathroom, because of its enclosed structure, had managed to trap just enough air to keep Harrison alive, at least for now. Harrison was chest deep in freezing seawater, with only about 4 feet of breathing space above the waterline. He had to tread water constantly just to keep his head above the surface. In the pitch-black darkness, Harrison couldn't see his hand in front of his face. As the reality of his situation began to sink in, Harrison realized something that filled him with dread. The image of his 3 crewmates being swept away was burned into his memory. In the suffocating darkness of his underwater prison, Harrison began to understand that he might be the only one left alive. Within hours of the Gascon 4's disappearance, search operations swung into action. Other boats in the area had noticed the tugboat was missing, and a helicopter was dispatched to search the waters of the Gulf of Guinea. But the vastness of the ocean, combined with the depth of the sinking, meant the wreck of the Gascon 4 remained elusive. As days turned into agonizing silence, hope dwindled. All 12 crew members, including Harrison, were officially presumed dead. Families were notified of the grim outcome. Unknown to the world above, the Gascon 4 was sitting upside down on the seabed, nearly 100 feet below the surface. And in a tiny, shrinking air pocket within, Harrison was very much alive, utterly alone in the pitch-black darkness. With the rescue sounds fading into silence, Harrison faced a terrifying reality. He was alone, 100 feet underwater, with no one looking for him. If he was going to survive, he would have to figure out how to do it himself. The first problem was the cold. In May, the surface temperature of the East Atlantic averages a pleasant 27 degrees Celsius. But Harrison was 100 feet down, where the water temperature was much colder. Shivering, wet, and wearing only boxer shorts, Harrison was facing hypothermia, his body losing heat faster than he could produce it. He had to act fast. After the initial hours trapped in the cramped toilet cubicle, Harrison, battling overwhelming fear, ventured out into the pitch-black, water-filled passageway. Driven by an instinct for a larger, more stable air pocket, he found his way into an adjoining officer's cabin. Cautiously, Harrison began feeling his way around the flooded officer's cabin in complete darkness. His hands searched through the water and debris until he found some tools. Working entirely by touch, he used these tools to strip off wall paneling from the cabin walls. With a mattress he found floating in the water and the material from the walls, Harrison was able to construct a makeshift platform. This crude raft allowed him to lift the upper half of his body out of the freezing water, dramatically reducing his heat loss. It was the difference between life and death. But the physical challenges were only part of his ordeal. Hungry, thirsty, cold, and stuck in complete darkness, Harrison was fighting a psychological battle as well. He tried to focus his thoughts on his family, his wife, his children waiting for him at home. Quite religious, whenever he felt especially scared, Harrison would pray to God to rescue him. The conditions were becoming increasingly horrific. Over time, the seawater began to remove the skin from Harrison's tongue. He could smell something rotting. He was certain it was the decomposing bodies of his former shipmates somewhere in the flooded ship. Every small sound in the dark was magnified and terrifying. The creaking of the hull under pressure, the banging of loose wreckage against the walls, and most horrifically, the splashing and eating noises as fish found their way into the wreck and began feeding on the corpses. Harrison was living in a nightmare, but he was still living. Each hour that passed was both a victory and a test of how much more he could endure. By the third day, Harrison's situation was becoming desperate. His makeshift platform was keeping him alive, but the air in his pocket was running dangerously low. He had been underwater for nearly 60 hours, and time was running out. Meanwhile, on the surface, a new ship had arrived at the site of the wreck. The Toucan, a professional dive support vessel, had been contracted by West African Ventures, the parent company of the Jascon 4. They had hired a specialized deep-sea salvage team from DCN Global, experts in saturation diving, who could work at depths that would kill ordinary divers. Unlike the first rescue attempt, this wasn't a search and rescue operation. This was a body recovery mission. The professional divers were there to retrieve the remains of the 12 crew members so their families could have closure. The saturation divers descended to the wreck in their specialized equipment, breathing a helium-oxygen mixture that allowed them to work safely at 100 feet for extended periods. Their movements were methodical and professional as they began the grim task of searching the overturned tugboat. One diver made his way through the flooded corridors, his helmet camera transmitting everything back to the surface team. His flashlight cut through the murky water and swirling sediment as he navigated the twisted wreckage. And then it happened. The diver's beam illuminated what appeared to be a pale hand floating in the water. He moved closer to investigate what he assumed was another body to recover. But as his light focused on the hand, it suddenly moved. The hand grabbed his.
Ceiling, yeah? Okay. What's that? Okay. Alright, you found one, yeah? He's alive! He's alive!
Diver's panicked voice crackled through the communication system to the surface team. He had just encountered something that shouldn't exist. A living person, 100 feet underwater, 3 days after the ship had sunk. It was Harrison Okene, and against all odds, he was still alive. The professional diving team quickly shifted from body recovery to emergency rescue.
What's your name? Harrison.
Okay, move that off.
Okay, Harrison. My name is Colby.
Harrison was carefully extracted from his air pocket and brought to the surface, where he was immediately rushed to a decompression chamber to prevent the bends. The man who had been presumed dead for 3 days was breathing, talking, and very much alive. The divers were amazed to find Harrison alive, and for good reason. What he had accomplished shouldn't have been possible. Most recreational divers don't stay at 100 feet for more than 20 minutes. Harrison had been at that depth for 60 hours. Here's the science behind his miracle. At 100 feet underwater, the pressure is roughly 4 times greater than at sea level. This pressure compressed Harrison's air pocket, making it denser and more oxygen-rich than normal air. Scientists estimate his compressed air pocket contained enough oxygen to keep him alive for about 2.5 days. When the divers found him, he had been underwater for almost exactly 2.5 days. They had reached him just in time. A few more hours, and Harrison would have suffocated in his underwater prison. After his rescue, Harrison spent 2 days in a decompression chamber. His body had adapted to the high-pressure environment, and returning to normal pressure had to be done gradually to prevent the bends. A potentially fatal condition, but the physical recovery was only part of Harrison's journey back to the surface world. The psychological scars ran deep. Harrison suffered from severe PTSD. He was haunted by nightmares, flashbacks, and survivor's guilt over the 11 crewmates who didn't make it home. Harrison's story became more than just a survival tale. It became a testament to the incredible resilience of the human spirit. In the face of impossible odds, in conditions that should have killed him, one man's will to survive and his faith carried him through 60 hours of unimaginable horror. Today, Harrison Okene holds a unique place in history, the only known person to have survived on the ocean floor for nearly 3 days. His story reminds us that sometimes, against all logic and all odds, the human capacity for survival can triumph over even the most desperate circumstances.